Welcome, everyone. My name is Tim Weber, co-founder, CEO, Diverso Energy, and really excited to bring you this webinar today. We've brought on two guests, Bram Atlin and Jenny McMinn, and I think this is going to be really interesting. No surprise to anyone, we are in a housing transition. Anyone who's in or adjacent to the housing market in Ontario, this is not new to you. Today, this is really about, how do we um, kind of reconcile sustainability, profitability, and just all the economic challenges faced in the housing market. But, what does that mean for sustainability? Is it complementary? Is it contradicting? What is it? And both Bram and Jenny bring not only a lot of experience with sustainability, but also experience with development. So their perspective is one of both economics, development, and sustainability, and kind of finding that balance point and or even complementary attributes of the two. So I'll quickly introduce the two of them, and we will get going. So Bram Atlin, principal, Smith and Andersen. Known Bram a long time. We've worked on a lot of projects together. Almost 20 years of experience in the industry. He leads the residential team at Smith and Andersen. Um, Bram is certainly a well-known name in the industry. He's kind of a go-to as a thought leader. And I think what makes Bram a bit unique is, not only is he an excellent engineer, but I think even more so, he really understands real estate. He understands what keeps real estate developers up at night and how decisions are made, and he tries to, bring that complementary balance of good mechanical design, but a design that also lends itself to the development as a whole. And Jenny McMinn is no coincidence. One of the first people I met, and we started Diverso back in 2014, Jenny has been doing sustainability and a pioneer of sustainability long before sustainability was popular. There's a reason why she was tapped by the Canadian Green Building Council to be on the board of directors. Um, and like Bram, Jenny also comes from a real estate firm. So she kind of wears two hats, real estate development as well as sustainability. And she has a passion for both and tremendous amount of knowledge and experience in both camps. So again, very interesting perspective on sustainability, but also through the lens of profitability. So kind of kick things off, looking at our current housing market. The standards have evolved over time. There's Toronto Green Standards, there's CMHC. Um, the green standards have been in flux. So kind of what's your perspective on that? Like, how does that impact your clients' desire to look at sustainability? How does that impact you kind of leveraging or how you position sustainability and, as kind of the greater project as a whole? Bram, maybe if you want to kick that off.
Sure. Thank you for having me today. So, yeah, there's a number of thoughts there. I mean, we I've talked about this before in other forums, but there's different types of motivations on why you might choose a certification or pursue some sustainable technologies. And to answer your question, the evolve the TGS and its involvement and its current debatable enforcement hasn't really changed a lot in the industry. There are some that are checking boxes, and that's great. But many have been able to justify through the help of their technical consulting team and underwriting, doing performance to justify all these technologies in their own right in terms of making it a win-win to reduce capital cost or op cost, one or the other, but look at a holistic value and really implement some of these technologies. But that's not to say that there hasn't been some hardship on some projects to meet certain green standards and certain objectives of those standards. But I think everyone is looking at it in a different lens.
Yeah, Jenny, what about you? I mean, this is obviously near and dear to you as Windmill, would probably making decisions in lieu of the Toronto Green Standard, but as a consultant, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's good to kind of unpack what's the purpose of a green municipal standard, and they can play many roles. Usually, there's kind of two key things that a green municipal standard is trying to do. One is bring up the bottom, so to speak. So those who are building with the absolute minimum performance requirements enforce, even further higher performance buildings. So that might be, I don't know, targeting the kind of bottom tier of performance-oriented developers. And then the other aspect, especially in places like Toronto, is to incent those developers who are targeting kind of top quartile performance or better through various incentives. And so I think that depending on where developers are on that spectrum, may have a different reaction in terms of how that's impacting their business model. And the truth is, the municipal standards are always evolving. So, from a developer's perspective, you need to come up with a plan to address performance that best meets your overall business objectives. And then we know politically tides change as they have very much south of the border. But I think to Bram's point, yes, there's a shift, particularly from the provincial government in terms of what's enforceable. But I think in practice, what we're seeing is that most folks are continuing to do what makes good business sense to them, whether that is maintaining a TGS tier one or tier two, depends on, I think, the level of commitment and practice that folks have in their shop. But I don't see a hard right turn yet, at least in the province of Ontario.
Yeah, my perspective on this is interesting because when we started Diverso, the green standards, Toronto Greens TGS existed, but it was really not moving the needle. It was version one or two, and it was maybe some low-hanging fruit, but nothing of any significance. Certainly not enough to impact our business and force developers to look at geothermal. And when we started Diverso, the whole idea was we're going to create this business model. Utility will take on the cost and risk, and this is great. Everyone's going to want geothermal because why wouldn't you? You can decarbonize a building at no additional cost. And as it turned out, we created a great solution, but we didn't quite have the foresight and understanding of the industry to realize no one had a problem. Condos were selling out in an afternoon or a weekend. Business was good. Why would you do anything different? And the more I understand the real estate space and development, I understand why they were reluctant to change. It is an industry that's, somewhat addicted to business as usual and, allergic to departure from the norm. I think the benefit of the green standards, it forced a lot of developers out of their comfort zone and to adopt new technologies. But what was interesting for us to see is a lot of these developers who maybe went along reluctantly or begrudgingly, they tried something like geothermal and it was, you know, not as difficult as they thought and not as painful as they thought, but it had a huge impact on the sustainability, the resilience, future value of their building. And now it's something they have just adopted. So in that regard, I see the green standards kind of, I used the analogy earlier. It's like forcing someone to go to the gym. They see all the benefits, and then you don't need to force them anymore because they'll just keep doing it. But they required that shift from carrot to stick in order to make that transition. And for that, I think it's done a lot of good. Whether it's continued to be needed or not, to be determined, I suppose.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
go
we
ahead.
see a lot. We see a lot of people that there's a lot of talk about decarbonizing your system and hitting certain targets in the context of green standards, in the context of ESGs, in the context of some funding programs.
Mhm.
But even in the absence of those, there's many out there that are evaluating the implementation of these individual technologies or approaches because they have real value outside of checking those boxes. And I think we're seeing that. And the green standards and the different certification programs have certainly brought the floor up, which Jenny alluded to, which was great. And people are then realizing it's not cumbersome, it's not a problem. And once they get over that hurdle, which I would, reframe as risk, they see it as perceived risk, then they can really focus on the benefits, which a lot of them have that. So that's been sort of the evolution over time. And people are in different sort of moments or different parts of that spectrum in terms of, doing it to check a box and doing it because it has a net payback.
Yeah, and I think you look at any of these, lead is very similar. If the purpose is to create momentum and to normalize a way of thinking, it's done a great job. You look at the law of diffusion of innovation, you've got early adopters, early majority, and laggards. But eventually those laggards get dragged along. They don't have a choice, right? And I think that's the job of the program is to create, if you're reliant only on early adopters like Jenny and Windmill, then you're not going to move the needle. But once you get into that early majority stage, which I think we're at now, then the laggards will kind of get dragged along because it's become the new norm. So
I,
kind
and
of,
I
sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to build on that, that I think, the city of Toronto and Vancouver as well have done a really great job, especially in the later versions of the Toronto Green Standard update, of giving the development community a proactive look at how they anticipate the standards will change. So starting to provide some the nomenclature around new units to define success, like thermal demand intensity, as an example, 5 years ago was a concept that most people weren't talking about. Now, at least in the city of Toronto, most people are familiar, or many are familiar with that term. And so there's both, I think, a need to proactively communicate things that matter, both what's required now, but also what's coming up. So the city can start to take a leadership position in seeding the way towards future leadership. And to Bram's point, the key thing for developers, it's not always more expensive to build to higher performance as it is to mitigate uncertainty. And so where municipalities are unclear about what is high performance and what is compliance, that to me is a kind of as an unquantified risk would probably have that project being, more costly than just simply stating and clearly articulating what that higher performance demand is. So just to say kudos to the city of Toronto for really continuing to evolve themselves and giving the development community a lot of information and proactive look at what's coming.
Well, and I think it's also forced a lot of clients to at least investigate technologies like geothermal, where there's a lot of misconceptions. It's complicated, it's expensive, you need lots of land. And I think, just looking at what geothermal is now, and they understand, okay, this isn't a technology, I don't need a quote unquote geothermal mechanical system. And folks like Bram have done a good job of educating clients that no, this is, you know, for all intents and purposes, a business as usual mechanical system. It's you can use heat pumps, fan coils, VRF. It's not the tail wagging the dog where geothermal, it's going to influence mechanical decisions to make sure everything works properly, but it's not going to drive mechanical decisions. You don't need to have a lot of land. Geothermal goes under the building in the footprint. It's pre-construction, doesn't impact your critical path. And these are all things that kind of got flushed out through that investigation. Even if they didn't do geothermal, at least they kind of went through that exercise and now have a better understanding of it and kind of breaking down those misconceptions. So TGS, is it here? Is it, or green standards? Are they gone forever? Are they going to be around? I don't think the three of us are qualified to have a strong opinion on that. That's a whole other webinar maybe in itself. But what's interesting for me, I don't hear much about the green standards recently just because with the transition from condo to rental, very few projects that I've seen anyway are not utilizing the CMHC financing because as much as the Toronto condo market has pretty much fallen off a cliff, the rental market is no picnic either financially. So without the use of preferred financing programs like CMHC, ACLP, very difficult for projects to pencil out. And CMHC, the hook there is there's also a energy target and a carbon target, not too dissimilar from the green standard. So it's almost this seamless transition from, if you're designing for CMHC anyway, and you still need to meet the Toronto Green Standard, I'm guessing, Jenny, Bram, like you're probably a stone's throw away from meeting it anyway if you already are compliant with CMHC, or how much of a difference is between CMHC and, say, TGS?
Just to keep everybody on our toes, there are some tiers involved in the CMHC program. And so to hit the highest tiers, i.e., accrue the most preferred, either preferred financing or granting, would be slightly higher performance than Toronto Standard Green, sorry, mixing up my acronyms, than TGS Tier 2. But certainly there's a compliance path that's in line with the City of Toronto requirements. And then wonderfully a benefit for those that are able to offer even higher performance.
Yeah, the real life analogy that I live every day is that we talk about what it would take from a carbon and energy perspective to meet ALCP, and we almost never talk about the green standard lately because you are meeting it,
Right.
at least from a carbon and energy perspective. There are other requirements as in both those programs that aren't energy and carbon, but just to give you some real life example, it's almost an assumption at this point that if you're going to comply to a level of ALCP that a developer is looking to achieve, you are meeting TGS tier one certainly, and potentially even tier two.
So Jenny, Windmill, you did your first geothermal project probably 15 years ago. You've done several since, some condos, some rental. Like outside of, compliance, whether it's CMHC, TGS, whatever the case may be, like what do you see at Windmill as just a practical advantage of having a technology like geothermal? Like what is, once the building's operational and all that stuff is finished, is it a negative? Is it a positive? And if so, what have kind of what's your experience been to date?
Yeah, no, great question. From a end user perspective, maybe this is a humdrum response, but it's almost imperceptible. It's a comfortable, in our experience of all the buildings we've built, and some we've had the pleasure of building directly with you and your team, Tim. It from a user perspective, it's almost imperceptible. As I said, it can be a very comfortable means of providing heating and cooling. And so a lot of end users might not be seeking out as particular technology when they're going to find a home to buy or rent. But we see that as a net positive if we're able to build a higher performing building that also hits the typical end user requirements of great location and great price. And we can also do that by providing a lower carbon solution. We see that as providing deeper value to our investors who are looking at the long-term value of these assets. And so, yes, while it might not change the positioning in terms of a sales price to an end user, say in the condo sector, we do know that there are other business benefits to us. Asset value, as I mentioned. I think for a long time when we were building primarily condominiums, we've been committed to doing low or no carbon now for all of our buildings from the start. And so in the early days, before there were things like energy service contracts, which have now become more common through suppliers like yourselves, we were doing all kinds of creative business strategies like green loans and things to help bridge the extra investment we were making as a developer to the condo owners who would actually accrue that, the energy cost savings over time. What we really like about the opportunity with energy service contracts in the condo space in particular is you're able to take that cost off balance sheet and effectively spread the benefit across to those users who will actually accrue it more directly. So for us, it's firstly, it's carbon. Is it a cost-effective solution? Absolutely. And we've had a great deal of success over the last 15 years where almost all of our projects are using geothermal. Not all, depending on what the asset type is, we use different models in terms of delivering it. But we're committed from a carbon perspective and from an enhanced return perspective.
I think, Bram, you and I have had this conversation. It's interesting, for me, we're in front of two or three developers a week, and we're kind of have a front row seat to this transition from condo to rental. So there's a lot of condo developers who maybe never built a rental before, and the construction might be the same, but the business model is very different, right? And what you prioritize is very different. You're going from uh, build, sell, exit stage left type of model to potentially hold, or even if you are still a merchant builder, you're selling to a very sophisticated, it's a pension fund, it's a REIT. These aren't consumers or investors. And, one of the things I've been trying to educate clients who are kind of dipping their toe into this space is you need to know who your buyer is. And those buyers are prioritizing sustainability. So set aside, yeah, I get it. You need to get through the next 18 months. You need to get your financing, find an equity partner, and get shovels in the ground. But you also need to think about your exit strategy and who's going to acquire this and what are their priorities. And a lot of the REITs, I've heard multiple times their concern, it's about future proofing. Their concern is the policy that hasn't been written yet. You look at New York State, Local Law 97 in New York City, that came as a surprise to everyone, where now your asset that's 3 or 4 years old is already antiquated from an energy and carbon perspective. And if that happens here, they see technologies like geothermal that are almost impossible to do post-construction. Retrofitting isn't like that's a nightmare, doing a deep retrofit on a 300 unit fully occupied building. So it's almost like an insurance policy. Even if the economics make sense up front and it's okay, the primary driver I find is they're more worried about what is going to be a priority in 10 or 15 or 20 years. So even if you don't plan on sticking holding it for that long, that's that's the mindset and that's the priority of the buyer. So I think that should be driving decisions up front as well.
Yeah, I mean, just on the switch from condo to purpose-built rental, I would echo a lot of what you said. In our side of it, when you're doing a market condo, even if you are achieving certain sustainability goals or certifications, uh, you are treating them as steps and then check boxes, right? And what happens is, I'd love to talk about some of the other alternatives to low carbon technologies, but in that sort of context, in a condo, even if it's high achieving, they might choose a different technology because it electrifies the building enough, right? But when you look at a purpose-built rental, and you start to have that longer view, as you said, even if I have an exit, the person that's purchasing it will have that longer view. And geothermal will use net less electricity than some of its equals in the decarbonization space. The other thing that comes up a lot on the purpose-built rental side, in the context of geothermal and many other things, is there's a big focus to durability and resiliency. And there's a lot of things that you can talk about under those things. In those topics, but geothermal is right up there when you talk about resiliency. So on the resiliency side, we look at, testing the building to against future weather data. We test it against extreme weather events, and on all those things, there's other technologies and other solutions that can do better or worse, but geothermal tends to fare pretty well against a lot of those other technologies on that score sheet.
Yeah, and I think, as much as the focus today is geothermal, it's really about electrification. And geothermal it's an avenue. It's becoming a much more popular avenue, but it's not the only one. And we've got projects where geothermal just wasn't feasible, and it could be for geology reasons. There's certain parts of the GTA, more, kind of further north, where there could be underground aquifers that make geothermal too risky, or there's certain jurisdictions, Kitchener, Waterloo, Guelph, where the region is just not friendly to geothermal because of water reasons. And I guess, in a case like that, air source heat pumps, electrification is electrification. If you're the utility, you might have a different opinion from a peak perspective, but I think for the developer, air source heat pumps have come a long way, and that certainly is a viable option that's on the table. I think
Yeah,
sometimes it's a practical, if it's a 30-story building, geothermal, having your entire infrastructure buried under the building is just a more practical solution, but certainly not the only one.
yeah. I mean, I would challenge you and say not all electrical solutions are equal. I mean, the goal in general could be electrification. Um, but what's really interesting on that topic is if I think about my career in the residential space, we've kind of gone from trying to make things as efficient as possible. So make gas boilers as efficient instead of 84% efficient. Now they're 93% efficient. Maybe you could try to argue with me that they became 96, 97% efficient, which I would argue back. And so it was about efficiency. And then the focus became decarbonization. And that was just sort of to bring the bottom up, which we talked about before, make and electrify and decarbonize some of our buildings. And it's funny that we've come full circle. And now the sort of it's assumed you're electrifying, but we're back to the efficiency conversation. So it's been an interesting ride, right? Like before, the carbon intensity was what we had to meet 5 years ago. Now the carbon intensity can be met with many technologies, and we're now talking about EUI and how do we meet it efficiently enough. So uh, we've kind of come full circle on that discussion.
Well, and I think it's an important one. Thank you for flagging it, Bram. It is funny how there's these seasons over the last 15, 20 years of sustainability. And I'll go back even one generation before you mentioned when LEED first came out in Canada, it was all about LEED energy cost savings relative to a reference case. And for a time, gas was actually more expensive per unit of energy. And so it just kind of flipped the script again, which I think to one of my earlier points when we were talking about TGS, what's most important for us all in this space is understanding the first principles of how do you create a high performing asset that is having the lowest impact on the planet. And firstly, it's avoiding the need for energy in the first place. So like coming all the way back to passive design. And I say that in light of Bram's comment in that when we compare different electrically driven mechanical solutions, if you're just going from a not very high performing kind of code line building and just switching over to all electric, that's going to be more expensive capitally, but also going to be more expensive from an operational perspective. But to get to that desired business outcome, we have to drive down the amount of energy that's needed full stop, which is good for the planet, but it's also very essential to drive the business case to get to a low or no carbon building. In that, if you're able to drop energy by 65% in our current market with gas being so much cheaper than electricity, you can still get those life cycle, straight up life cycle, no complexity to the business model. Those technologies can pay back. And I appreciate your reinforcing that point, Bram. It's not just about a fuel switch. It's actually really thinking about how do we avoid needing energy in any form, and then couple on what's the lowest carbon solution or supply source to get there.
So how do you find that?
I guess there's a reason it was reduced before you reuse and recycle.
Yeah. And I mean, sorry, Tim, if I'm too off script
Yeah.
here, but I think one of the interesting things we just at Windmill, we're working with the federal government right now on the business case to get to zero carbon. And one of the interesting reflections we found of looking back at our own portfolio, especially in the last 5 years, is we had set an internal maximum window to wall ratio. 10 plus years ago, no developer would ever touch anything that couldn't be as close to 100% glass as possible. And so, well, we had kind of gotten here a little more organically towards, well, what provides the most comfortable, lowest energy, lowest carbon building? We've landed on a place that balances the quality of experience of natural light comfort and greatly reduces energy need. And interestingly, the balancing out of what is a good amount of glazing, but not too much, actually helps reduce the cap cost on the envelope because windows are expensive. And so I think it is all about looking at what are the key wins for an asset and how do you create the best business model and technical solution to yield those outcomes. And for us, yeah, geothermal has typically been a part of that, both energy savings and carbon outcome.
So Jenny, when you're doing that, do you ever look at, because this is something that comes up all the time. We have clients that, well, what if we go full zero, zero gas or full net zero? And I struggle a little bit because I feel like, especially somebody entering into that space where that last 20% is so complicated.
Yep,
Whereas I'm like, you know what? How about we walk before you run? I can get you
sure.
70, 80% carbon reduction without breaking a sweat. But now to cut the gas line and domestic hot water and multi-res is the biggest challenge, right? Like we
Yes.
can do with geothermal, we can probably handle 30 to 50% of the load depending on the cooling loads in the building with a water to water heat pump, and then the other half is an air to water heat pump, and there's storage tanks. I'm like, oh man, heat pumps on top of heat pumps. Like, what is this worth it? Right. And I always, because I get it. You can argue yes, but you can also argue no, depending on where you're
Sure.
coming from. And I think I'll often circle back to what is your primary objective here? Like, if it's to deliver a building that's future-proofed. It's saleable to a pension fund down the road. It meets all your standards now. Because the beauty of where they're at, if you were to stop shy of domestic hot water, if that became a priority later, that's retrofittable
Yep.
without a major impact. So maybe you're all set to go. It's kind of future proofing, and we can put an air to water heat pump and a storage tank down the road if that becomes a priority. But
I
kind of,
think
I know you guys are on the other end, right? You're
yeah,
pushing boundaries, but not every
just to
developer is
say,
a windmill. So
yeah, but and just to kind of to articulate clearly for us, it is about getting that last mile to zero carbon to prove to the market where we need to go and how do you get there. Is that the right approach for all developers? No, it might not be. For us, we both have a business model that works where we've proven out that we can build a zero carbon building that is cost comparable to market typical. But we also, because we're so clear and consistent on our mandate, are able to attract investors who are looking for profit, but they're also looking for impact. So we're able to get a lot of other benefits as a for-profit developer because of that clarity and consistency of our commitment to sustainability writ large, but in particular zero carbon. There's lots of great work to be done, to your point, Steve, sorry, Tim, of, yeah, if you can get 80% of the way there, meet 80% of your heating and cooling loads through geothermal and wait to go the next step to full zero carbon, that could be viable. I do think it's worth considering whether it's worth putting the gas line in at all, and maybe I'll volley that one over to Bram. But just to say, I think first and foremost, we always have to be looking at what are the business outcomes that you're looking for, and then what's the right technical solution to get there.
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of thoughts on that and deciding which avenue to go to. On the, do you need a gas line at all? I mean, other than a generator, because when you talk about resiliency and runtime of a generator, which has a direct relationship on insurance, life safety, and resiliency, you'll probably still have gas for that because no one wants to go to fuel oil until something else comes along. But putting that aside, you can get over the cooking, you can get over the gas fireplaces. They can now be electric or mist. We have a number of buildings, some with yourselves, where there's zero gas. In the context of how geothermal helps us get there, the way I've kind of seen it and on many jobs with various targets is you can get. I'm even going to lower the bar from what Tim said. If you wanted to go to an older green standard and just decarbonize by 30-40%, you can do some bolt-on technologies, air source heat pumps or small spaces in VRF, or even some straight up electric. And then when you get to 80%, there's still a number of technologies that can do it fairly eloquently and simply. But when you get to 100%, I haven't seen an approach at a big scale. So I'm going to give myself a bit of a caveat because smaller buildings can do things a bit differently. But on larger buildings, I haven't seen a true zero carbon building done as simple as when geothermal is implemented. So, we've done heat pumps on top of heat pumps on top of other things with supplemental electric, and it gets complicated very fast. I give a 101 seminar on mechanical and decarbonization approaches, and I always talk about the last mile, and that's exactly what it is. Like getting, the last mile it's logarithmic in how hard it gets near the end.
yeah.
Domestic water, though, there's some really simple, old, but have been branded new ways of looking at things. Like we're doing these tests on jobs where we now have a mandate if there's a deep decarbonization component to it, which is many of our jobs. We select things as we always have, or the way we've decided to do it. And then we have an automatic test where we see what's the biggest domestic hot water storage tank we can physically fit in that space. So if it was 1,000 gallons, can we put in 5,000 gallons? And the reason for that is that we can reduce the simultaneous production. So
Yeah.
what that means is the geothermal fields, when you say it's hard to just do 20-30%, now that geothermal field might be able to do 100% of that domestic or 90%. The total load doesn't change, but when it's being produced and how it's being produced can be a bit different. And supplement a little electric for the top up and just take the edge off of geothermal. There's a lot of ways with some good front end, complicated thinking at the front end can make things really simple and elegant on the move on the move forward basis.
So, Bram, I think what I love about what you just said, and I couldn't agree more, a lot of the innovation we're seeing now is not in technology, but in application, right? A perfect example of that, we're working with Mattamy Homes, building these zero gas communities. And what's interesting for me, I've been in geothermal for 20 years. The technology we're using was old when I got into this 20 years ago. It's just a simple one borehole underneath the building. Nothing, it's not district energy, it's not TENS, it's not complicated, it's really simple. However, that coupled with just an old regular, just a standard hot water tank, it's a zero gas community, no outdoor air conditioner, no venting, no carbon monoxide. So it's incredible that using that really simple technology was how we were able to kind of come up with a business case where they can sell these homes at very close to the same price as business as usual. Operating cost is almost the same as business as usual, but you're a huge impact on carbon, a huge impact on safety, and you've opened up the backyards, no air conditioner. But that's more through innovation and process, business model, how we're integrating it cost effectively, not impacting schedule, has nothing to do with technology. So I like that, right? Because the other nice thing about that is it also means it's going to work. Because sometimes when there's too much innovation in technology, and after 30 years of being in the HVAC space, there's a lot of cool technology that unfortunately gets decommissioned because it was just maybe too innovative and just found out later doesn't work, right? So how do you strike that balance between innovation and reliability? And that's always a tricky one.
Yeah, that's a really tricky one. We want to be innovative. We want to, we want to push the whole industry forward, but you don't want to do it at risk of making things too complicated, and therefore the reputation of that approach or that technology or the people involved is such that that takes a hit as well.
But
So
if
those things are all concerns, but there's no way to move forward but to do it in a way that um, that does push the boundaries to achieve the targets you want to achieve. And really the solution is to do that upfront thinking. It's the bane of our existence is looking at others in our industry that either take a copy and paste approach or do the bolt-on technology solution. Here's the solution I give to everyone, and if you need to decarbonize, I'm going to bolt on a air source heat pump or bolt on a certain technology and check the box and move on. So that those are very harmful to the industry at large, I find.
Well, it's no different than you look at smartphones. All the innovation went into the design up front so that the user interface with the end user was actually really simple, right? And I think that's kind of what you're trying to say, I believe, is you're innovating through upfront design, not just adding complicated technology that could create an interface problem down the road. And I
Yeah.
think that's a really smart approach to sustainability.
And we'll try to find a way to support it through the process too, right? Like that, our preference would be to continue to be involved as well and support that.
So, Jenny, when you guys did your first geothermal project 15 years ago, why do you think, like for a technology that's been around for so long, it's not a new technology, it's tried, it's proven. Why do you think it's taken so long for developers to adopt the technology? Why do you think it hasn't been adopted sooner?
Well, and you touched on this earlier, Tim. I mean, for quite a while, developers didn't need to do a whole lot to sell, especially in the residential space, to sell condominiums, period. So there's a reluctance. If your business model is working, why change it? I think just to say that, at least for the kind of the last generation of buildings. Um, I think the other thing is just it's a bit of a learning curve, and so there's a reluctance sometimes to fully understand something new if you haven't tried it out yet. And then I think it's just really looking at your process and being willing to adapt slightly to be able to accommodate a slightly different approach. And so I think to successfully, for us since we've been at it for a long time, a few key lessons that we bring to the table is we've had the benefit of working with multiple suppliers, so we have a pretty good handle on the market. We know what's important to us in terms of a supplier relationship, which is one, does the business fundamentally understand the business of geothermal, which frankly is a lot about drilling, and in that that's one of the major capital costs to a project. To understand, to the earlier conversation, what does the operations of a geothermal system look like over time so that you can bring that information back to the planning and design phase and really optimize the size of system, which again can really greatly help in limiting capital costs. I think the other for many on the condo side is just the complexity of the business terms to be able to bring in a technology under, say, an energy service contract, and make sure that all parties are, adequately serviced and not over penalized. There are a lot of components that if you're not used to doing using the technology and or using one of these alternative business mechanisms to get there, some people just shy away from that. The good news is 15 years forward, there's no shortage of successful precedents with completed projects. And certainly, Tim, I am not even aware of actually the size of your current portfolio. I'm sure I'd be blown away, but we were confident enough in the approach 15 years ago and the kind of the basic physics of the solution. We were confident it would work, and we were happy to help seed the market and bring along others and share our knowledge along the way. So I think it's a much more comfortable place now to do so, understanding all the risks, and especially, suppliers like yourself who have lots of experience across the life cycle. It helps immensely.
Yeah. Well, thank you. It's a great answer. I think, yeah, and it makes sense. Every industry has early adopters, and not everyone can be an early adopter. So, um, we've got a lot of questions. Just trying to filter through some of these. So, Premier Ford's cancellation of the Toronto Green Roof bylaw, does it imply future issues for sustainability? I mean, try to keep these answers as short as possible. I think my quick 2 cents on that is anything that's moving in the wrong direction, I don't think it's necessarily going to impact the future. It impacts the present. Um, it sends a message, but I think it's up to the industry. There's so much momentum right now. You're not going to stop sustainability. You might slow down a little bit, but I don't see it stopping it. Jenny, Bram, quick 30-second answer on that.
I think the people that were being forced to hit the minimum tier one requirements are likely going to take any opportunity they can to cost save. So there could be a period of time where some folks back down. But I think in practice, and Bram, jump in as you're consulting more than I am at this point, but is that it's understood, we've known what to do for a long time, and many will just continue to charge ahead with the municipal standards as are, and as opposed to getting into entertaining legal debacle and fighting with an entity like a municipality who is also going to needs to be your friend to see through a successful project execution. So I think most are going to stay the course, and some may choose to fight legally. But I think we're going to see another season come out depending on what happens with the next provincial election, anyhow.
I would agree. And the only thing I would add is there's many that are hoping the outcome is the reduction or elimination of very specific pain points and not the total
Yeah.
abolishment of carbon and energy standards. The green roof bylaw just gives, I don't have any bone to pick there, but it's just that made me think of it because I hear certain clients talk about if we could just get rid of this of the, in the lead days, it was the what was it, the bicycle rack. Like I just don't want to do a bicycle rack. For some reason that became the whole
Sticking point.
sticking point. And if we can get rid of the proverbial bicycle racks, then I think a lot of the noise will go down. And it's rarely on carbon and energy if it's a reasonable target.
Yeah, and those conversations are happening. Is it too little, too late? We'll find out. But next question, I think this is a quick one. Where does the new Build Canada Homes program fit into the geothermal landscape? right now, nothing specific other than I think, you know, just touching on what we mentioned earlier, what we're doing with Mattamy, the proven business case and technology case to roll geothermal into the production home landscape, I think opens up that market. They're coming along at a good time. If Canada, Build Canada Homes wanted to look at some type of a geothermal program for new builds, the technology and business model works. It's really what is the appetite for this current government? Is that going to be a requirement? And
Well, the RFQs that have come out have mentioned modular and geothermal by name, at least some of them, not saying it's mandated, just, asking for experience. They're kind of, modular and geothermal curious in the way they question the RFQs. So that
yeah,
might in itself
And
suggest an answer.
And I
yeah,
think just to be clear, what Bram is referencing there are the CLC, the Canada Land specific
mhm,
land plays. In addition to that, BCH just last week, Thursday or Friday, released their investment guide, which is referencing that BCH will support greener, more sustainable housing. They don't get into a ton of detail, but I think the trend that we're seeing, given that much of the residential that's going to be built in the next few years will need to be government backed in some way, is that the feds still have are still asking for sustainability. A little murky as to consistency, but certainly carbon's part of it. So and also made in Canada is a big piece as well. So I think providers like yourselves who are Canadian-based companies will have an advantage as well.
and when you reference Canada Lands, is that specific to the Downsview project, or is it just Canada Lands in general?
So basically with and so it's very fascinating and a fun, interesting time because BCH evolves every week. It has a new evolution and a new kind of component. But essentially, Tim, what happened is Canada Lands as an entity of BCH released 6 sites across the country. The first 2 have been released, one Arbo at Downsview, and the second is in Ottawa, and the address is escaping me. But effectively, what they've gone to market asking for is design builder proposals, whereby
Okay.
CLC will maintain development and ownership of the assets over time, at least for the first 2. There might be some learning. We'll see how the future ones get evolve, but federally, essentially, there's an opportunity to build out on federal lands, and there is some ask for performance. Excuse me.
Good. CMHC and the geothermal utility model, is there any update on that? Yes, so there's CMHC has 2 programs. There's the ACLP and MLI Select. Everything that we've heard to date from CMHC has indicated they are okay with the third-party ownership or the energy as a service for the ACLP, but are still reluctant to accept it of the MLI Select. And those are 2 different pools of capital of 2 very different programs. One's more of an insurance policy, one's more of a lender. They have more latitude what they can do on the lending program, the ACLP. So that's the current update on that. Second part to that, any experience drilling angled holes under city right-of-ways, being approved. We're certainly aware of that. To my understanding, the city has acknowledged that that's okay. I don't know what the approval process looks like. Drilling angled holes certainly isn't a problem. So far to date, that's not something we've needed to do. We've managed to find the room underneath the building footprint rather than going through the brain damage of trying to get that permit in place with the city. As far as I know, if that is needed, it's something that is an option.
Tim, I just want to go back to the first part of that 2-part question.
Yep.
So one, we did a mid-rise project under MLI Select, and we were not able to convince CMHC
Correct.
in time, which you know very well, Tim. But so we did end up purchasing the asset, but still came up with a good solution to implement geothermal there. I just heard today, and again, it's the federal landscape is changing so quickly, but possibly if MLI Select ends up going under BCH, there may be an easier path to maintain energy service contracts, but it is evolving. But and with even without it, there are alternative ways to deliver.
Yeah, and we're in, as you can imagine, this is very important for us as we're owned by a large infrastructure fund. Mandate is to deploy capital, and so we're in regular conversations with CMHC, and it's a Crown Corp, so just trying to get a direct line and a clear answer is not as easy as it may sound. So, but it is evolving. And I think the message here is that's moving in the right direction. They're starting as more geothermal is going in, and they're getting pressure from developers because a lot of the large developers, they want geothermal, they don't want to own it. They recognize this is a living, breathing entity. It requires active management. They just don't want the risk. It's not a piece of equipment, it's infrastructure. And that's a really important identification with geothermal is it's not equipment, it's infrastructure. And they don't own infrastructure, they own bricks and mortar. And that's being communicated to CMHC. So fortunately, they are coming around on those. Joseph, Ireland, I owe you a meeting. What about geothermal in Ireland? And yeah, I mean, how do you get a first mover? Well, you find an Irish version of Jenny McMinn, and other than that, I think it is a tough business model because not only is the technology new, the business model is new, and I think like anything, you have to build momentum. No developer likes to be first. Fortunately, I think what scares developers more than being first is being last. So once that momentum starts, it's amazing how quickly developers come on board. Um, Geoexchange is certainly a new renewable energy technology. I think would be beneficial to use the impactful renewable energy term more readily when describing the benefits, such as the dramatic carbon reduction. And this is an interesting comment. I've been spending a lot of time with different ministries within the Ontario government, and I mentioned this recently when talking with the Ministry of Energy that what makes geothermal so unique is you can talk about carbon reduction, you can talk about demand side management, you can talk about on-site renewable energy available on demand 24 hours a day, 365. And that's what makes geothermal so unique. It just checks off so many boxes. It's sustainable, it's resilient, it's future proofing, it's carbon reduction, but it's also does it in a way that doesn't impact the grid. There's no major grid infrastructure requirement. And there's very few technologies that check off that many boxes. So in that regard, I would 100% agree with that statement. Um,
I can tackle this one, Tim. I just read it while
sure,
you
go
were.
ahead. Go ahead. It's
So
all you.
I think the frustration from them all, which I completely appreciate, is how many different performance metrics we've all collectively been using over the years. And I guess what I would just offer back is I hear you. It's frustrating for sure. But the key thing to me is there is no one single metric that is going to drive success for a project, be it financially or technical. And so I think kind of coming back to some of the earlier themes, it's really important to understand both either as an owner from first principles perspective, what really matters for this project to go. And then you find the right associated metrics as opposed to assuming that just a GHGI, a greenhouse gas intensity target, is the be all end all. It's not. It's one thing that we collectively need to address. But as I was mentioning earlier, we need to focus on great places to live that are comfortable. People have light, that they want to be in, not just that the supply is low carbon. That's important, as are all the other metrics. So uh, I think this was just a comment, and I hear you. I
Sure.
agree with you. Bram, anything to add there?
Well, I was going to say our current housing crisis and marketplace has also put a bit of an exclamation mark on that. And you're hearing a ton of talk about livability and suite designs, experience around the building. How is it different than I am just a condo in a nice city that will sell by itself? So you're already getting flavors of that due to other pressure points in the industry, and it's been great. And then, carbon and energy usage can also be a differentiator. It's an opportunity for it to be a differentiator again, which we've been all waiting for it to be a mover in terms of the rents you can command, which we haven't seen that as much. But maybe all these factors where you actually have to market your building well for it to come alive might provide that opportunity.
What is the impact on schedule around demo and shoring when introducing geothermal? So fortunately, as the industry's evolved, that impact is essentially not at all unless well, geothermal happens between demo and excavating. So we need a level site. We come in, we drill our holes, and they're countersunk below like final grade, lowest level of parking lot. And the entire infrastructure is installed, it's countersunk, it's cut, we remove those plugged, remove those stubs of pipe. So the idea is everything gets put in and terminated before excavation and shoring. You shore and you excavate, come back later, and then during that horizontal stage when we're tying all the pipes together, there's probably a 2 to 3 week impact on the schedule at that point because we need to get out in front of pouring if it's if it's I mean that depends on the foundation. Is it bathtub, raft slab, mat slab, spread footings? But regardless, I would assume about 2 to 3 weeks impact on the schedule when you're down in the pit. You ever seen examples of air source heat pump running during the mid-afternoon, storing energy in a large water tank to avoid the need to extract heat at night? Have heard of that. I think quick comment on that. I think that to me is a perfect example of a lot of effort, space, and money putting in to do something that I would argue, obviously I'm biased, we could just solve by quickly drilling a hole in the ground that's there forever before the home goes up. But I think it's kind of trying to get to the same efficiency as geothermal without drilling a hole. But
I mean,
Bram,
my quick take on that, without going down a technical rabbit hole, is that decarbonization and relies on a number of things, and one of the pillars is thermal storage of some sort. So, which is really just a very generic answer to that question. So the answer is yes, all decarbonization technologies have some degree of thermal storage and utilizing cold water temperatures. That this is more a technical deep dive. But if you look at those pillars, that's one of them. Thermal storage is a critical piece of decarbonization.
yeah, and I think it depends on whether it's a single family home you're talking about or a 300 unit multi-residential building. And I think what we've found in the single family home space is it's such a price sensitive market right now that to get developers interested in low carbon, if it has a $1 impact on the cost of the home, it's going to be very difficult because there's no requirement. So you have to
Well,
make
I'll counter with there's a reason they do domestic hot water storage tanks and not instantaneous electric domestic hot water
correct.
production. They're still doing thermal storage just in a micro scale.
Yeah. And I'll counter that with geothermal is energy storage. So there you go.
I
Box
was
two.
waiting for you to say that. I didn't want to steal your thunder.
Well,
I was trying to tee it up for you.
Yeah.
you push me far enough, I'm gonna respond. You know that. Um, so we're almost running out of time. I saw there was a question. This is a great question, and I think I'm gonna punt this one over to Bram or Jenny because my answer will be too biased. Is there a point at which the energy demand has been reduced so much that geothermal is more challenging to justify?
Yeah, I mean, so my take on that is context matters because if you have a really tall pencil tower, you want to reduce energy demand so geothermal can serve most of the building, which it otherwise couldn't. But on the smaller scale, if you had a smaller development, a mid-rise or low rise, and you reduce the energy so low that you could just do, then the answer is potentially yes, right? You could conceivably do a passive house, small punched window building, and a little bit of electric heat wouldn't matter, straight up baseboard heat, because it would use so little energy in its absolute terms. So if you look at those two examples, everything in between exists as well. So that's kind of my 2-second answer to that question. But generally speaking, on the mixed use and densified sites we're looking at, reducing energy demand helps us greatly.
So I'm gonna time, one last question. This is a good one. Any future partnerships with large-scale developments like Mattamy? Are you seeing those types of partnerships picking up or slowing down in the current challenging housing market? So it's a great question. And that's why I think in the world of sustainability, we can't just ignore the realities of real estate economics, the challenges, what keeps developers up at night. And it is a very challenging time. And most developers are distracted with just, in some cases, just keeping their business afloat, let alone getting projects going. So in that environment, asking someone to be sustainable is kind of like, going to a family that can barely put food on the table and pay rent and tell them you've got this amazing RSP opportunity at the 12% return and you'd be crazy not to do it, right? Great concept, bad timing. So what we're trying to do is shift the narrative. This isn't about sustainability. We're trying to provide a solution that will help sell homes. This is getting rid of, that's why I mentioned earlier, this is about getting rid of the backyard air conditioner, of creating a better solution, a better end user experience at the same price. So now this is meant to be complementary to a downwards market where you're trying to look at a differentiator, something that helps with sales and marketing. It's not even necessarily about sustainability. That happens to be a significant byproduct, but we're taking a sales and marketing lead, not a sustainability lead, just because of that reason in this market. That's the only way you're going to get the attention of most of the, especially low-rise developers.
And I would just add to that, Tim, as a developer, that it's also leading with sustainability or deeply weaving sustainability and can provide preferred access to investors as well as land deals. So like we need to be throwing everything at the table to be able to do business these days. So this is a sound economic case. So now is the time to lean in to get work done.
Yeah. There's a lot of questions here I'd love to answer. It's 3:02. I think I'm going to try to get to these individually, or feel free, anyone, if some of these are more business related, feel free to reach out. Love to connect with you. Same with Jenny, same with Bram. But thank you everyone for joining us. And Jenny and Bram, I knew this was going to be great. I also knew we were going to go way over. So, great conversation. Appreciate both of you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks to the group. I love nothing more than to actually have a real two-way dialogue with lots of chat. So appreciate all the energy that all the participants brought as well. Thank you.
Yeah, this is
Thanks for
great.
Thank you.
hosting.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.